So, what are we doing on the show this time, Tim?
Moving with Batman.
What?
Brought to you by GC Cola.
It's a mad, 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 mad idea, Tim. You're no Nancy Sinatra.
Oh no, Paul? Check this out. Who will buy this wonderful bat cave? Such a cave you never did see. Who will buy this map made of lucite?
No sale.
To the bat poles! Welcome to the Bat Poles, where we're back in the bat saddle again. This is Tim in Tokyo with my brother Paul in Hanover, New Hampshire.
Oh, I forgot what you guys look like. It's been so long.
That's an in-joke. So we're sorry this episode is 5 weeks late, but we both had too much on our respective plates in December. But we're back now.
Here we are, and I don't know, Tim, what you told our listeners about why we were off for the time that we were off.
I just mentioned that I was moving. I didn't go into anything about your side of things, but...
Oh, well, I'll just say, I was going to just, say this in case people were wondering, out of just sheer curiosity or prurience or whatever.
Well, when we take time off, then people always assume something terrible has happened.
Well, in this case, something kind of did.
Yeah.
Our mother, Joanne, fell right after Thanksgiving, and my family was my part of the family, my immediate family, my wife and child, and my wife's brother and his family were in Massachusetts. We rented a kind of Airbnb house. It wasn't Airbnb for Thanksgiving, but and all convened there. So that place is about 2.5 hours away. My mother ended up going to the hospital in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is about a 2-hour drive from Hanover, New Hampshire, where I live. So my father and I were stuck at a Hampton Inn in Springfield for nearly two full weeks, with only a few trips back and forth to pick things up and get medicines for my father and things like that, or our father, I should say. So my mother's doing better. Our mother, there I go again. Our mom is doing much better. She's back in Hanover. She's getting physical therapy. And she had a concussion, but mentally she's back to baseline, which is great. So she's just got a neck injury that still needs to heal. But she's 81, so it was a pretty scary moment. But here we are. We're back in the bat saddle, as Tim says, and I'm wondering what a bat saddle looks like. I'm sure it's got, a giant bat up in the front that's probably large enough that you can't see over the horse as you're trying to ride in your saddle, since, of course, insignias are more important than practicality in the world of Batman.
Yeah. Okay, so our theme version this time is from Chad Vermillion in a YouTube video errantly titled 1960 Batman Theme, Guitar Loop Station, published September 27th, 2015. The description says, theme from the original 1960 Batman show on a Roland RX-55, which I looked it up, it's a guitar synthesizer, and Boss RC-50 loop station. So in the video, he's got a guitar in his hand, and he appears to be very happy about it.
Yes, he's all smiles.
And you see him like kind of setting things up. So the vibe of this is not so much a performance as your friend just got some cool hardware and he's demonstrating how it works.
Yes.
And he still clearly thinks it's still so new to him that it clearly seems extremely cool. I'm judging from the look on his face.
So I think guitar synthesizer. So you notice on the guitar, he's playing sounds that sound nothing like a guitar, like drum sounds and stuff. And the guitar synthesizer allows him to do that. And then he, makes these sounds and uses the loop station to loop that sound. So he's got his own kind of backing band set up, and then he plays the melody over that. So, yeah, I mean, he needs more practice to really do a good performance of it, but it does seem cool. I looked up some information about these devices. So the loop station, well, you can see in the video that he's doing stuff with his feet. Mm-hmm. And on the boss.info site, it mentions that the RC50 has 7 foot switches for intuitive control, real-time control of playback speed. I'd like to know what these foot switches look like. Well, I guess actually I'm looking at the thing here now. I see, those must be the 7 foot switches. So I guess you put this thing on the floor and, okay, interesting.
There are even some controllers for ancient video games that have been installed so that if the game uses 2 different controllers on the Atari 2600, let's say, you can like run the right joystick with your feet. So there are 5 buttons, 5 pedals, left, right, up, down, and then fire. It's not a bad interface, but I think it would be easier and more intuitive for an organ player to play either that kind of controller with a game or the Roland that Mr. Vermillion is using here. I got to say that this feels like it should have gone to his friend and nobody else, the friend he was trying to, impressing with his new technology, because it's frankly not very good. It's not by any means ready to be, listened to by a large audience.
Yeah, ask me. What he's capable of doing with the hardware is interesting, but it's not a very good rendition of the theme.
No. And since, the Batman show had yet to be broadcast until 1966, maybe he's just playing the original hefty version of the theme from 6 years earlier.
From the black and white Batman show.
When it was still a mess, when they were still working out the kinks in the score. Anyway, interesting nevertheless.
Okay, so as promised, sometime in November, we're talking about the various Nora Clavicle script versions. We have a first draft dated November 6th of 1967, a revised draft dated the next day, November 7th, and then 2 days later, a final. And there's also a short document that contains the script for the tag scene that leads into Penguin's clean sweep, which is virtually unchanged as shot. They're just, some of the usual minor reworkings of dialogue. And that document also has a page entitled Changes to Anticipate in Nora Clavicle Show. And those notes appear to have been written between the revised draft and the final, since most of the changes that are mentioned show up in the final. Mm-hmm. And I'll link to all these scripts in the show notes. Again, I've linked to them before to get input from listeners, which we did from the all-seeing, all-knowing 66 Batman message board. And I'll quote one of those in a minute. I also, preparing for this episode, went back to episode 113, where we talked with Fred, also known as 2F, the proprietor of the late lamented Batgirl Bat Trap website. He joined us for our episode about Nora Clavicle, and he had read these scripts back then, which we hadn't yet. And he pointed out that, as I said, the first draft is dated November 6th. Filming was done by November 15th. So, really quick turnaround on these shows.
I'll say.
Now, of course, since he had read the scripts back in 2019 for that episode, I'm sure we're going to hit some of the same points that he did then. But that was 4 years ago, and I guess everyone's memory could use some refreshing.
Yes, and we, may have, humans regrow all of their skin within the space of a week. They lose it and then they regrow it. Perhaps that's happened with our listenership. We're listening to us 4 years ago, so.
So on the message board, Ken Holtzhauser commented about the scripts. While the scripts don't answer the most fundamental question I have with the story, is this a satire on male reaction to feminism or a straightforward anti-feminism farce, which was our question too, I'm forced to suggest that the first draft is a better Batman episode than the aired episode. For example, the Lady Wrestlers would allow a reuse of the Ring Around the Riddler set and make the episode more cost-effective. Maybe if the episode was a little more cost-effective, money could have been spent on the ending instead of Mrs. Olsen's fifth grade class painting a backdrop.
Mrs. Olsen from the Folgers coffee commercials?
Yeah, or from Little House on the Prairie.
Yes, of course.
And I guess they painted it all black, so it's a Rolling Stones song coming to mind. But anyway, getting into the script. So what I did with my notes was I just kind of went through all three and meshed them together in the order of the events in the script. So rather than going, okay, here's the first draft and then here's the revised draft, I just sort of mushed it all together.
Yeah, I did something along those lines as well.
Anything you wanted to say before we dig into the actual script?
Well, this is quite technical about the documents we have in front of us from the Dozier archive, but I find it a little bit poignant almost that we have these couple of pages of the tag for Nora Clavicle, which does not appear in the first draft, and then the changes to anticipate sheet. You get a sense that of being in the thick of the day-to-day, jobs of the people working on this and what kind of activities they, specifically had to engage in to make sure that this got filmed in time. They were making it to the their shooting deadline so it could get into post-production. And there's even a line at the bottom of page A, the first page of the tag, that says, we have shot or are shooting this morning. I just love that. It makes it all feel like it's kind of happening at at this moment, or we're getting a peek into, not just the finished product, but the production of it in a way that's more effective, I guess, for me, or more direct, it seems to me, than just reading a draft of a script, which of course is an insight into the the production process rather than just the finished product itself. But this is like we're almost looking over their shoulders in real time as they're sweating it. Oh my God, we got Burgess Meredith for an hour and a half, and we're shooting this morning. How are we going to get this done in time? Penguin, not you again. And then T2, Penguin on phone anyplace, day, Miss Clean beside him. And in that same line, underlined and capitalized, it's written, we have shot, comma, or are shooting this, comma, this morning. I wonder why that had to be mentioned at that point in the script, but it seems extra urgent in that it's actually crammed into a stage direction.
Right, and the script is today's script, not yesterday's or tomorrow's. So
that's right.
It's like the newspaper is coming out every day.
Yeah, exactly. Pull the front page. We got a scoop.
Kids, ask your parents what newspapers are.
Yeah, so my reaction that I just described has a lot more to do with just the poring over the documents and the how terrific it is that we have them, rather than about any qualities of the script or Nora Clavicle's faux or satiric or just horrifying version of feminism. But nevertheless, it's one of those geek out moments that makes this show so much fun to do.
Okay, so what I noticed in the first two versions is it's pretty much as shot at first that, Gordon gets the watch for his years of service and then gets the boot. But then those first two versions say, oh, his replacement's coming in, and then Batspin, opening credits, commercials, and then we see Nora. But It doesn't make any sense because we don't know who Nora is. Now, if his replacement were the Joker, the cliffhanger might work because there'd be some payoff. You come back and whoa, but like Nora Clavicle, who the puke is that?
Yeah, that would have been a huge letdown. For the price that the audience pays for the cliffhanger.
Yeah, but the cold open needs to tell us what this episode is about. So in the final script, Nora's reveal is before the opening credits.
Right, and it's speaking of newspapers, doing these opening, the cold opens is basically, like the lead line of a news story. If you lose them after you, the old joke is, what do you do? The editor says to the writer, "What are you doing? You're not mentioning, et cetera. You're not mentioning this issue in right away, right up front." And the writer says, "Well, I'm doing it in paragraph 2." And the editor says, "Who's going to read paragraph 2?" So I think that even if this was a known quantity, who was the villain for the show, who's the episode, it wouldn't have made sense to wait until Joker, wait until after the theme for Joker or whoever to show up.
Yeah, I was just thinking that too. I mean, it would work better than with Nora, but still, it's probably best to have Joker show up before the Batspin. And then you're saying, oh no, this episode is about the Joker becoming police commissioner.
Exactly. Yeah. What is this episode about? Is it about, some supervillain becoming the police commissioner or what? And then, you'd have Schrodinger's cat right there in front of you, and you might switch over to Lost in Space because you really don't know, what's going to happen. And maybe you don't care enough to stick around. But if you like the Joker and you see the Joker or whoever in the opening, the opening tag, or not the opening tag, but you know what I mean. That's a little oxymoronic.
The Joker as police commissioner is a better hook than who is going to replace Gordon.
Absolutely. And the hook here is that, Nora, even though we don't know who she is a woman. Right. And, so the emphasis is placed upon how bizarre it is that, someone with ovaries might end up being police commissioner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, if it was some faceless guy, that would be even more of a letdown. So?
Yeah, exactly. This wheel of Parmesan cheese is now the commissioner of police. Sounds like a Monty Python moment, right?
Sounds pretty cheesy. Anyway, so in both of those versions, at the end of the banquet scene, Gordon says, "And my watch doesn't even work."
I don't know why I sighed so heavily just now, but I found that joke and the joke that, O'Hara's lame joke from the first drafts of the script about, even Father Time had to sit down, after the shocking moment of Gordon being fired and Nora Clavicle, and Mrs. Lindsay taking over the city, police force. It just doesn't fit. And it sounds way too smart for Chief O'Hara, who, by the way, in the tag, calls, both this written tag and the tag in the final, as shot, calls her Nora Clavicord and has to be corrected. So, his lameness and stupidity is thematized. It's right there on the screen, pointed out. So a joke about Father Time sounds a little bit slightly too learned for our beloved chief of the GCPD.
Yeah, next he's going to be quoting Shakespeare.
Not.
First draft, page 9. Batman and Robin are about to go on patrol from the Batcave, and then we hear a musical tinkle, which is identified as the Batgirl cycle communicator. So Stanford Sherman has decided that Batman and Robin and Batgirl have some way to contact each other. Of course, that got cut, and that never did happen in the whole third season, but I wonder why not. Because Batgirl was supposed to be so mysterious, and so they didn't know how to contact her. Maybe it seems like it went against some idea of what they thought Batgirl was.
Yeah, some kind of perimeter they'd drawn around her when the character was first developed. I wonder. Yeah, I guess I kind of wondered about that too. I wonder do you think that this has anything to do with how she's brought into the show, this episode in the draft versus how she's brought into the episode in the final version? Because what she does in the draft is, Batgirl shows up at Nora Clavicle's first. At first Clavicle says, well, she's a woman, so maybe we can persuade her to come over to our side.
Well, when
that doesn't happen in the final version, does it?
Yeah, right. When they have this call, this is her first appearance as Batgirl in the first draft.
Right,
and
she tells Barbara already in the opening.
She tells Batman that she's planning to infiltrate Nora's operation.
Right.
But as broadcast, I think they just run into her on the street, don't they? Batgirl.
Yeah, we have the shot of her going to the Batgirl cave and, the broom closet of her apartment. And then she comes, she rides her motorcycle out the false wall. But I don't remember. I'm going to have to go back to the final version of the script and see where she finally does appear.
I'm pretty sure they just encounter her like maybe at the bank.
Oh, yes, that's right. When they arrive at the bank after the bank is robbed, they get together and Batgirl, I remember this because Batgirl says, and I should just remember it by looking at the script, but Batgirl says, my computer isn't, virile enough, Batman. I peek over your shoulder when you look at the portable computer.
That was another point I wanted to talk about, but I'll come back to that in a minute. There are multiple statements in these scripts, particularly in the revised draft, of the Terrific Trio being concerned that Nora may be up to no good, and they all get cut. So, for example, page 8 of the revised draft, Bruce says, "I suspect there's more to Miss Clavicle than meets the eye." Dick says, "Something crooked, Bruce?" Bruce says, "I wouldn't jump to any conclusions just yet." And then 2 pages later, before Barbara changes to Batgirl, she's talking to who else? Charlie the Parakeet, and says, "Charlie, I have a hunch Miss Clavicle's crusade for women may turn into a crusade for crime. Batgirl had better keep an eye on things." But as broadcast, it seems as if Batman and Robin and Batgirl are just simply outraged by the treatment of Gordon and O'Hara and not suspecting any actual criminal intent.
Right. And that just becomes clear as the script moves on, and there's never any moment of realization where, Robin says, holy incarceration or something like that. And so she's actually, she's a career criminal and we're all screwed.
Yeah, I don't think they realize it as shot until she holds Batgirl at knitting needle point.
Right.
And then, ties them, does the human nod and tells them about the insurance policy. But up to that point, they don't seem to suspect any that Nora is up to no good.
Yeah, so I have at least a hypothesis about why that business was cut. Okay. The business of both Batgirl and Batman and Robin saying, "I wonder if she's up to no good." I think There's not very much time when you've only got 22 to 25 minutes to tell the entire story, including a tag that introduces the villain for next time, since they no longer have cliffhangers.
Yeah.
They're trying to keep the audience with them from week to week, obviously. So I wonder if it just made more sense to cut those lines, include some other business, or keep everything under time and under budget, and just go with the audience's assumption that Nora Clavicle is the villain, because we've seen her in the opening titles after the theme. She's the special guest villainess.
Yeah.
So it's more economical. It doesn't make much. It's not very logical in terms of story, but it's more economical, and the message still gets across to the audience.
Yeah. Well, I think the quest for brevity with this being a one-parter resulted in a lot of cuts. I think that's probably why Batgirl didn't infiltrate Nora's operation either, because that would have been a little more time-consuming. And in our episode, we said, and I still kind of feel this way, this could have been a better episode if it was a two-parter.
I remember that.
Of course, it could have also used some money for a better dock set.
Yes, I think we ought to thank Ken personally for the Mrs. Olsen's fifth grade joke. If only they'd gotten a credit in the closing, even more often, maybe for the entire season. So my other thought, and this I think is a little more out there. My other response to my answer hypothesis for why this stuff was cut has to do with the way that Batgirl is presented in this episode. It seems as though she's kind of an honorary man in this episode, because there's never any, even she says things like, women are taking over the police force, that ought to be interesting. She says that in the draft, as if she's, despite the fact that, as Stanford Sherman writes here, the musical tinkle very feminine, is very feminine in parentheses, despite the fact that she's got basically lace and doilies strewn all over her bat cycle. Her Batgirl cycle, excuse me. It's a female cycle. It has, primary and secondary sex characteristics, as if lace were actually a primary sex characteristic of some kind. In any event, she is definitely feminine, but this episode wants to have it both ways. Like, the fact of being a woman makes women hold rolling pins when they're supposed to be guarding a bank. Right, as if the rolling pins were primary sex characteristics or something, and as if gender were nature, and there's nothing to stop it. But the fact that Batgirl is doing men's work totally screws with that conception of feminism and its connection to femininity, which seems. It's almost as if, men simply cannot be feminists because they would be working against their best interests, which is to have your shirts cleaned more than once a week in Mayor Linseed's parlance.
Yeah, and then also, even though, later on, Batgirl is not freaked out by the robot mice, she sees the wisdom of making the police all women and then releasing robot mice to scare them. That's obvious to her. Of course that would work.
I might have known. You can't get police women to help you catch mice.
So I think that's another way she's an honorary man.
Yeah, but not a word is spoken about the fact that she's wearing this snow cone cup bra under her cat suit, not even a bat suit, incredibly tight lycra, that's extremely sparkly, and she's even got the red wig that she puts on to make certain that another primary sex characteristic, quote unquote, long hair can be seen. I'm reminded of a story I think I read in Omni magazine a long time ago, where there's a little boy, it was back in the 80s or 90s. It's a boy who's basically gender neutral. He's like 7, 8, 9. He wants to wear dresses. He still identifies, as a boy, but he wears dresses all the time. And this is just kind of a story about, dealing with that and wondering about it, and, allowing the child to just do what the child wants to do. And there comes a point where the 8-year-old talks to a friend, and the friend says, "Why do you wear dresses? Are you, you're not a girl." And the little boy says, "Well, I still have a penis." And the friend says, everybody's got a penis, but only girls wear dresses. So, there's a real complication here in that Batgirl is so, sexualized, erotically feminine, as well as having, the kind of, traits like feminine intuition that have gone, that have been connected to women for, centuries. And yet she's able to look objectively at these things, quote unquote, about women that are, just factual as far as the episode is concerned, that they're going to be scared of mice, that they're going to be talking about, they're going to exchange recipes and be annoyed when they're asked to do things like stop a bank robbery when their job is to stop bank robberies.
Sawate. My name is Stella, and I am the host of Batgirl to Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast. Batgirl to Oracle is a podcast dedicated to Barbara Gordon, the first woman to hold the mantle of Batgirl for an extended period of time, roughly 1967 to 1988. The goal of Batgirl to Oracle is to examine the character's history from her first appearance as Batgirl and continuing through her tenure as Oracle. Each episode looks at a vintage issue of Detective Comics or Batman, as well as other books like Justice League and Freedom Fighters, and modern issues of Batgirl and Birds of Prey. I also keep track of news involving Batgirl and other members of the Bat family, and I have a revolving series of segments like Babs in the Tube, which highlights appearances of Babs in TV and film, Shipper Spotlight, which looks at a variety of comic and pop culture couples, gives their history, and determines whether they are hot or not, Reading with Stella, which could be described as an audio drama, or just me reading a book that relates to Babs or doesn't, and of course, the mainstay literature recommendation. I have been blessed to interview writers Scott Beatty and Chuck Dixon on their Batgirl Year One work, Brian Q. Miller on his Batgirl run, Dwayne Swarzynski and Christy Marks on their separate Birds of Prey work, and the creators and actors of the Batgirl Spoiled, the web series. I hope to interview more creators and actors in the future. My goal, most importantly, is to make a fun, entertaining, and thoughtful show that people enjoy and from which they learn. Find the show online at thebatmanuniverse.net and iTunes, and follow the show on Facebook and Twitter at Batgirl to Oracle. Thank you, and fly on, Babs lovers.
Edward and Alphonse Elric, as a result of attempting the forbidden act of resurrecting their mother with alchemy, have paid the price. Edward lost an arm and a leg. Alphonse lost his whole body, his soul now attached to a suit of armor. Together they search for a way to make their bodies complete again and uncover a deadly plot by their country's military rulers. That's the concept of Hiromu Arakawa's Fullmetal Alchemist, one of the best manga ever made. Tim and Patrick are rereading Arakawa's masterwork in search of interesting sound effects, translation errors, goofy humor, and, oh yeah, a great story. The podcast is The Law of Equivalent Exchange, a chapter-by-chapter look at the manga Fullmetal Alchemist. New episodes every other Monday, wherever podcasts are found. What are you willing to exchange? In the first draft, page 11, Batgirl comes into the police department just after Mrs. Linseed leaves and says, I'm always ready to offer my help to the police department. So she's on their side, supposedly. But on the very next page, Nora says to Evelina, Batgirl is not to be trusted. At heart, she's a man lover.
Right.
So Nora never buys the idea that Batgirl wants to join them.
Yes, that is true. Can we get into wrestling? Because I don't... this is something that Ken mentions, right? That the wrestlers would have been good motivation for, what's to come. But, and of course, the ring could be reused, as he also mentioned. Yeah, I mean, what's your take on this? Was, the point of this just so there would be some kind of motivation for the knot that they were, tying the tremendous trio into? Because, that kind of knot tying was a feature of, wrestling, at least to an extent.
Right. Well, we're jumping ahead here, but...
yeah, I know. So, we can leave that for when we get there. Okay. We're not too far off. It's only a 25-minute episode after.
Yeah, not this
not
episode.
Our episode
no matter how short the episode is,
it's always an hour and a half, no matter how short it is. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So the draft has a couple pages, 13 and 14, of a different scene of Gordon and O'Hara at the unemployment office talking to a counselor, and not really necessary. Easy to cut that one.
Too long. Mm-hmm.
The scene inside the bank during the robbery, that's pretty much the same. In the first draft, the policewoman whose makeup gets smudged threatens to arrest the bank manager for interfering with an officer of the law. Okay. Interfering with the officer of the law's makeup, I guess. The conversation on the sidewalk about bay leaves and paprika kind of evolves through the three versions. First draft, page 16. The girls are heading toward the door with their bulging sack of loot. Near the door, the two other policewomen are still absorbed in their conversation. The manager runs over to them. Angle on two policewomen. Second policewoman. Then add a little paprika and simmer over a low fire for 15 minutes. Manager runs up. Manager. Officers, my bank is... Third policewoman, ignoring manager. Don't you use bay leaves? Manager. Officers, larceny is afoot. Second policewoman. No bay leaves. Paprika. Third policewoman. What about garlic? Manager. The bank is being burgled, I tell you. Second policewoman. Puzzled frown. I don't know about garlic. I've never tried it. Wider angle. Include girls. Passing by on their way to the door, led by Evelina. Evelina. Two policewomen. Just a pinch of garlic. Second policewoman. Smiles. Thank you. Manager. Bug-eyed. Thank you. Evelina. Don't mention it. Actually, the revised draft version turns out to be exactly the same. The final version is the same as what's shot, except it's missing Angelina's line about peppercorns.
Then, add a little paprika and simmer over a low flame for 15 minutes.
Don't forget the bay leaves.
And a peppercorn or two.
Thank you!
Thank you? When my bank's just been burgled?
I hadn't thought of bay leaves. Here.
By the way, listening back to episode 113, I discovered another Batman Star Trek casting crossover. And on the board, Theron of Andor also mentioned this. I'd never noticed before that those two policewomen talking about recipes are identical twins. Their names are Alice and Ray Andrees. And they also appeared in the Star Trek episode I, Mud as the multiple versions of Alice.
Right.
And by the way, as we're recording this, I have just finally released the long-promised blog post on Batman and Star Trek casting crossovers. So, and I attached a little podcast to it just so it would show up in the podcast feed too. But if you can't see the show notes on your podcast player, you can go to thebatpulse.libsyn.com, and it's the post right before this one.
Yes, and Tim did an incredible job of putting together what is at this point I think the definitive online list of the crossover actors.
Yeah, I think it's more complete than any other list on the internet that I found, but I'm not sure that it's 100% complete. So,
right, of course,
if you find that there's one missing, please let us know.
Then it will be the most complete, no doubt about it. And we'll continue to get, have more, entries and have a larger number of entries than any other list that we know of.
Now, one thing that's bugged me about the broadcast version of this, how does the police dispatcher know that the bank has been robbed when she hasn't taken the manager's call? Now, I'll come back to that in a minute. I was going to come back to something else, and I don't remember what I was going to come back to. But I do have it all in my notes, so we'll get there. The final script, page 17, Robin says, "You mean back to the Bat computer in the Batcave, Batman?" Say that 5 times fast. That line always cracks me up.
How many bats would a wood bat bat if a wood bat could bat wood?
You mean back to the Bat computer in the Batcave, Batman?
Oh, okay. The thing I was going to come back to, I've arrived at it in my notes. The part where Batgirl says,
I think I'll tag along, Batman. The instruments in the Batgirl cycle aren't quite as sophisticated as those in the Batmobile.
Thank you.
That's not in any of the scripts. Why did they add it? Is it a reminder that men can accomplish things?
I wonder if it was more practical. Is there a reason why they need to be, kind of huddled around the Batmobile at that point? Because they opened the trunk to get at the mini Batcomputer.
Yeah, maybe they thought it would be a little presumptuous of Batgirl to just walk over to it with them when it's not part of her equipment.
Mm-hmm. No, I was wondering about, something larger having to do with the cause and effect chain of the episode. Do they need to be there in order to not see something or hear something? Or do they need to be together is this just a kind of really obvious excuse for making sure that they're, together for the scene where they need to be tied up, which is only, a scene or two later.
Well,
tied up together in the tangle.
Let's see, page 17. That's actually, according to the final script, that's the end of the scene, and the next thing that happens is that they're walking into the warehouse.
Okay.
So, as far as the scene outside the bank, I don't think it really makes any difference. Maybe it's just a way to end the scene.
Well, and it's a way to end the scene with the three of them doing something together, which then kind of slightly more strongly motivates their appearing at Clavicle's hideout simultaneously.
Yeah.
So, it's probably just a minor thing, but it sounds like the kind of thing a story editor would chuck in to make certain that it's, absolutely clear that Batgirl didn't just show up, coincidentally at Clavicle's hideout.
Man. So then in the revised draft, page 15, a police car passes the terrific trio with siren blaring, and they all follow the car to Arbeck's clothing store. And the policewomen in the car had just heard the dispatcher talking about the big sale. And the terrific trio didn't realize that the sale was the reason that the police car had the siren running until they got to the store. And then they hear the dispatcher mention the robbery. Now, this scene is all totally unnecessary as far as the overall episode goes, but having it here gives the dispatcher time to actually answer the bank manager's call. So that makes a little more sense if you include all of this rigmarole.
Sure. Good catch.
So the cut created a minor problem there, but so they get there, the manager's out front. Now, in the first draft, they can hear the band from the opening scene, and the manager says that the band was the robbers, with the drum and everything.
Sure.
Now, those notes that are about changes mention that they're removing the band from all scenes except the first one. Yeah, the very first point. Nora and Band will enter luncheon at end of tag, not opening of part one. Band will then be lost throughout show.
Where did I put that band?
So the band, in more ways than one, of robbers are at Dropstitch & Co. warehouse. In the revised draft, in the first draft, they're in Stilson's gym. But in the revised draft, so Batman, Robin, and Batgirl go to the warehouse, and as soon as they walk in, dozens of knitting needles are launched at them, but they duck. And then, apparently, using a knitting needle, Batman has a sword fight with four girls. So
must be a heck of a long knitting needle, at least in Sherman's imagination.
So knitting needles are firmly established before the one that's pointed at Batgirl. And that point is also a little different. So they think that the stolen money is hidden in the tuba. And Batgirl...
I did a double take when I saw that line. I sort of, slid over the band part and then had to go back and reread the last two pages.
Batgirl looks inside the tuba, and as she's doing so, Nora steps out of a door in the bass drum and holds a knitting needle at Batgirl's shoulder blades. I don't know how, on their dwindling budget, they're going to set up a bass drum that has a door in it.
Right, and who are they going to have stand in for Nora Clavicle? Billy Barty?
I mean, bass drums are not that large, even the ones that are held in marching bands by, that are strapped to the shoulders of the drummer.
Yeah, it's like a Japanese taiko.
Well, just like when Gilligan is dreaming that he's Jack, the giant killer, they just shot him and the giant, who was being played by Alan Hale Jr. as the skipper. They just ran a little kid around wearing Gilligan's clothes and shot it in long shot. So maybe we wouldn't notice that the proportions of Gilligan's body are all wrong.
Wow.
Why is his head 3 times the size of its normal size of head? Well, look good on paper, I'm sure Sherman was thinking.
Okay, so wrestling. First draft, page 22, there it's Stilson's gym. The bank robbers go in, and Nora turns on Batgirl here, holding the knitting needle on her. Knitting needle is hard to say. I'm going to say knitting noodle here sooner or later. The trio are tied up, and the girls beat up Batman. Page 24, stage direction, on ring. Carnage Incarnate. As the girls, now you got the 2 words with the same root there, but anyway. Carnage Incarnate, as the girls team up to put Batman through every hold known to wrestling. They bounce him, pound him, jump on him, twirl him over their heads, and finally drape him over the ropes like a limp lettuce leaf.
Oh, you skipped sit on him.
Okay, well, I typed it into my notes. I guess I missed that. But anyway, they beat the crap out of him, basically.
Yes, and then decapitate him and hold his head high as a sacrifice to Crom.
And Ken Holtzhauser wrote on the board, I'm not crazy about the idea of them body slamming Batman. A better idea would have been to lay into Batman's chivalry and have him refuse to fight a female no matter how well trained.
Exactly. Great thought.
And Robin Boy Blunderer says, I think it would have been too much. Forget the logistics regarding the stuntman or Adam. It would have been another pointless denigration of the character, which I definitely agree with.
Yeah. I mean, to not have him fight back as he doesn't, in this as written, without at least saying, I shan't, raise a hand against a woman in a physical altercation, just seems, it double debases the character, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, speaking of secondary and primary sex characteristics, women wrestlers, this was a popular spectator sport, I think, in part because it was so weird that women were doing basically work, quote unquote work that had only been assigned to men. But because television wrestling in the U.S. has always, had the aura of fakery and chicanery, it's always been fixed. It was just the extent to which people pretended to believe in it that made it popular. So, this is kind of like, it's a strange moment in this script because when the women actually turn out to be real wrestlers, they're really beating the crap out of Batman in that bit. They're not faking it, which would kind of defang the weirdness and the humiliation for men of seeing women who could beat up somebody. Instead of just pretending to wrestle somebody to the ground, but to have these women actually wrestling a man and Batman, no less, suggests that there's a lot less to the notion that women can't fight or women aren't strong than anybody would have suspected. So it seems as though they're weird in a way that Batgirl is also weird in this episode, in that she is somehow a woman and simultaneously male. It's not that she's just a smart woman. It's more that her characteristics are split between her body and her mind, and how she identifies or something. What she's able to do and what she's capable of doing is all defined by masculine conventions and norms, whereas her looks are defined by her body, or her looks are defined by her femininity, or femininity is defined by her body, something like that. But the wrestlers are like that as well. They're gorgeous and all of that, but they also fight like men. They're not just faking it.
So they're kind of an intolerable mix that the show just doesn't resolve. Instead, it continues to like make a direct split between what men who don't wear costumes do and what women who don't wear costumes do. They're and how they think and what size rolling pin they carry. I'll give you a hint: men don't carry rolling pins because that would be girly. Anyway.
So, I guess this is the first draft. Nora reveals that she's insured Gotham City and will destroy it before tying the trio into a human knot. And, yeah, it is curious that they lost the wrestling angle, but they kept the human knot. I wonder, maybe it was a nice, cheap death trap because you don't need any equipment. You just need your actors.
Right. But, without the motivation of the wrestlers putting them into this knot, right, it does feel really contrieved.
Yeah,
even more contrived than it was otherwise.
What's the connection between a female police commissioner and the Siamese human knot? Nothing.
Not as far as I know. Have they become a kind of Gordian knot that needs to be cut in order to be, solved, in order for the problem to be solved? I don't know.
They probably just didn't have time to come up with something else. Let's toss out the wrestlers for whatever reason. Maybe, again, time economy. But we got a death trap here. Let's just keep it.
So what do you suppose motivates the fact that there are three different ways in front of us of getting out of the trap?
Right. They keep the same trap.
One in the draft, one in the second draft, and one in the final.
Three different methods. Yeah. So the first draft version, a janitor sees them tangled together and thinks it's an alien with three heads. Now, if you ask me, that's too dumb even for season 3. That's saying something.
What if they were all wearing dinosaur suits?
And he drops his pail of soapy water, and it splashes on them, and they get free.
Yes. It lubricates them, as Batman says. I wonder if they cut that because of the word lubrication.
Now, of course, another problem with that is trap escapes with outside help are never satisfying. And there are some in the course of the series.
Good point.
And it's always more satisfying when Batman himself breaks them out of the trap, as he does in the final, of course.
Right. Now, the second version of their escape, let's see, it's an explosive human event. That is, they sneeze. They start thinking about pepper and paprika and things that make them sneeze. And ragweed, they keep repeating them as though, eventually if they just say the word over and over again, the thing will appear, like they're, incantations or something. Then they sneeze and blow themselves out of this 3-person knot, right?
Well, having moved and found that my cough is psychosomatic, I can kind of imagine the idea of thinking about ragweed and starting to sneeze.
I gotcha. I understand. Nevertheless, that would have been really hard to stage. And also, since, I don't know, is there information in this, is there expository in the second draft about how, moving a single muscle will end up killing all 3 of them?
Well, let's see here.
Because if there is, then the sneeze would be completely illogical.
There is an extra human knot scene that's cut. Robin, what happened to those 3 acrobats she was talking about, Batman? Batman, they starved to death, Robin. Robin, starved to death because they couldn't get out of the knot? Batman, yes, but that's not going to happen to us. Batgirl, I hope you're right, Batman, but every time we move, we just get more tangled. Batman, we've got to try harder. The future of Gotham City depends on us. And then it goes to Gordon and O'Hara in the unemployment line. And then when we come back on page 26, Batgirl. It's no good, Batman. We can't wriggle out of this knot. Batman. There's one last hope, Robin. Think of roses. Robin. Roses. Why, Batman? Batman. Just concentrate on roses. Robin. But I'm allergic to roses. I sneeze every time I get near them. Batman. Exactly.
Batman, you stupid kid, just shut up and think about roses.
Batgirl. I follow you, Batman. If we all sneeze at exactly the same moment, it may break us loose. So, no, there isn't any mention of possibly killing themselves by moving slightly.
Mm-hmm. But in the final version, that fact is capitalized upon by the way that they approach escaping, which is basically to just like Batman wiggles his ears.
Mm-hmm.
So with subtle movements rather than explosions, explosive movements end up being the solution, which makes more sense since they have in that version built up the sensitivity of, what happens if they move even a little bit in this situation.
Yeah. Now, those notes on changes, number 6 says, trio get out of knot in another manner. Primarily dialogue and action change as discussed. Now, of course, we have no way of knowing what was actually discussed, but or what was wrong with the sneeze version. Like you say, it might have been hard to shoot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they'd have to put everybody on wires to make them convincingly fly away from each other, I suppose, or else they just have to jump really high.
By the way, watching this episode, I noticed that in the human knot scene, as they're trying to get free, Adam's voice sounds kind of like the elderly Adam voice of his later years. It sounds, kind of rougher like that and older.
If I can wiggle my ears, and if you are able to bend the fourth finger on your left hand just a fraction of an inch,
You might strangle us all.
release us, Batgirl.
It's interesting. Like, wow, there's the mayor from Family Guy. What's he doing here?
Holy anachronism.
Or Batman from Return to the Cape Crusaders.
Interesting.
Now, first draft, page 26, says the mice will explode in 30 minutes. The rough draft has the same. Now, in the final, it's changed to a half hour after sunset. Although Nora only tells the trio that it will happen as soon as night falls.
As soon as night falls, I'm planning to destroy all of Gotham City.
Now, I'm wondering why this was changed, not in 30 minutes, but 30 minutes after sunset. Was it because the set for the docks was all black and looked like night? So they had to justify that by saying that it was at night, but clearly this is being shot in the daytime, so we need to postpone it till after dark, or we need to give them more time to come up with the Pied Piper plan, or what?
Well, those are plausible. I wondered a couple of things, and I didn't check, and I should have. Maybe I can check now on the original Pied Piper of Hamelin story. Of course, there are other originals. The original is that all the children in Hamlin are taken away by the Pied Piper and never seen again.
Yeah.
That version didn't survive into children's books of the late 20th century. But I wondered if it was simply that that city set is so. Unphotographic looking or, unrealistic looking. It's, so highly stylized. They wanted to keep the lights out so that nobody could see just how stylized it was. And of course it didn't help. But, I did wonder if maybe Nightfall was somehow important to the original tale.
Now, the other question comes up when you watch the episode. How do you set a timer for 30 minutes after sunset?
Guess you'd have to have a light sensor.
Yeah, light-sensitive mouse.
Or maybe the timers on them are like light timers, in houses where you can set it to turn on for a couple of hours in the morning and then turn on a couple of hours in the evening, and then change the settings as the days get longer and shorter over the course of a year. But those mice, they don't look like they would accept microelectronics very easily. Oh, man. Those mice.
So now the Gordon and O'Hara in the unemployment line scene, what we get here is as shot, but then it goes on for quite a bit longer than what we see on screen. But in the revised draft, Nora shows up.
Right.
And, like, what's Nora doing there? It seems like she should be busy getting out of Dodge because the mice have been released. But she comes along and she wants Gordon and O'Hara arrested for loitering in the unemployment line.
Oh, right.
Why would you do that? Then Alfred steps in and he tells Nora that Gordon and O'Hara are instructors at the Bruce Wayne School of Criminology, so they aren't unemployed vagrants. And she accepts that, and she and her cronies, proceed to get out of Dodge. But this all explains how Gordon and O'Hara met up with Alfred, which, in the broadcast version makes no sense because suddenly they just appear together at the end of the episode.
Right. Yeah, apparently they had Alan Napier on hand and wanted to use him, but they couldn't figure out how to make it happen logically without and still keep the episode under the time limit.
Now, in our episode, Fred, 2F, said that this scene was shot because he has a still from the part that was cut. So the whole thing was shot, apparently, with Alfred stepping in and Nora in the scene, but they must have cut it for time.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the reason.
Because, it really would have been nice to have that in.
Yeah, it's actually a good bit, of Alfred's usual cool head and clever thinking in order to, get Batman or his team out of a fix. But characterization is not something season 3 can afford.
No. After Robin calls Chief Linseed about the mice, he says it's diabolical. But all versions of the script have him go on to say that women's rights crusade was just a trick, so she could loose all these exploding mice and not even worry about the police. Now, but as broadcast, if he just says it's diabolical, you're kind of left to decide for yourself what exactly it is that's diabolical. And I wonder why this was cut. That I think it would have been nice to have it in. Or do you think that would change your impression of what he's talking about? Would have
No, not at all. I think that's the one point in all of these scripts where somebody calls it like it is. That this is the reason why she infiltrated the police force. Because, we get the sense almost that it all happened kind of by accident. Like she thought, oh, well, I'll take over the police force because that'll be a way to, run Gotham City and do whatever I want to do with it. And then she comes up with, blowing it up with mice. Just
right.
She's found some way to get the insurance.
What I mean is with that missing, with just it's diabolical, are you losing something by taking out his explanation of what it is that's diabolical, or is it self-explanatory?
I think it's relatively self-explanatory, but it also goes by so fast that if you are wondering about it, it was just basically an epithet. It's just like saying "gosh" or "holy something or other." It doesn't, it's almost just like an expression of a feeling rather than a real statement about what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it would have been nice to have it in, but
I do too.
Maybe it was just time again because it's kind of a long line.
Mm-hmm. And nevertheless, that line would have snapped the whole episode to grid in terms of what Nora's overall plan was for anybody who might have missed, something earlier in the episode.
Yeah, because I think this episode could have used a little bit more kind of explanation of what Nora is doing here exactly. And I kind of miss those references to maybe she's up to no good from earlier in the episode that all got cut.
Yeah.
Although, as you said, maybe the audience would just assume that because she's the special guest villainess. So
Right. Or, my God, she's a feminist. Therefore, she she must want the destruction of everything patriarchal, including the police force and the town.
I think it's important that we know whether or not the heroes suspect her of being the special guest villainess or not. Because as broadcast, it doesn't seem like they do until the warehouse scene.
Right. Yeah, agreed. Well, there's, so little time to even show Batman and Robin, walking around in the Batcave, thinking things over and putting a clue or two together that might, force them to suspect her. Yes.
So another thing that gets cut, the first two versions have people commenting on the mice. And a mice running out of a man's jacket pocket and down his pant leg, which sounds pretty hard to shoot. I guess you could use a string, but it would look pretty fake.
Yes, so number 8 on the changes to anticipating Nora Clavicle show says, eliminate scene 116 where mechanical mouse runs down man's leg, etc.
Yeah. No more budget for extras.
Oh, and here's something else that gets cut, changes to anticipate. It gets cut, but was never actually written in any of these scripts or drafts. Number 7, a new scene in Act 2 in an insurance office where Nora is doing something about insurance on Gotham City. This is to keep Nora alive through show. Not literally alive, but, keep her character visible.
Yeah, because she does kind of disappear after the mice are released.
Yeah. Release the hounds, Smithers. Yeah.
But I imagine they didn't add it because there was no time.
Right, and because the episode is so short anyway, sure, she disappears, but she's not, she doesn't disappear for more than about 4 minutes of actual, show footage.
Yeah, I suppose not. The flute business is mostly the same in all 3 versions. The final script adds Dozier's narration as they arrive at the docks.
Right.
Now, the first 2 versions have a suggested tag, just an idea, and I wanted to read that.
This would be page 37 of the original draft, and page 35 of draft 2 of the revised draft.
Fade in. Interior, Commissioner Gordon's office. Commissioner Gordon, Chief O'Hara, Linseed, and Trio in Commissioner Gordon's office. Yeah, we know. Everything back to normal. Miss Clavicle and girls won't be bothered by men for a long time since they're all in Gotham State Women's Prison. Linseed's wife calls to tell him his dinner is waiting. Commissioner Gordon opens his gold watch. It's running now. Fade out.
The patriarchy and its long storied history, represented by the gold watch, are all back together. The band is back together, man.
God's in his heaven and all's right with the world, I guess.
Yes, and right, women are doing what they're supposed to be
and
doing.
God is a man.
And God is a man, right? Yes, God-man is in his heaven, and all's right with the God-man world. Wow,
Tom the Dancing Bug reference on our show. We're branching out.
Oh, that's funny. I have one, last thing to say about the way that men and masculinity and femininity are represented here that makes the show a little subversive by accident. And I don't think this was intentional at all. And yet, in some way, I think that the text that is the show, as shot, as we finally see it, as it finally came to us, is accidentally subversive in that. There's a kind of positive spin on femininity and, jobs and roles that are assigned to women in patriarchy, but it's negatively attained. Women are, all through the episode, once the women are in positions of authority, they nevertheless decide to prioritize the quote unquote women's work that they were always doing before, like exchanging recipes and going shopping, and that makes them seem frivolous, right, and ill-equipped to be in charge of the police force or of city government. But they've been, those are the jobs like, cooking and cleaning, et cetera, that have been sloughed off on women so that men could go out and, have jobs and have, public lives with their friends and everything else. But in a way, the fact that all the women kind of, I don't know, regress, back to holding rolling pins. I keep coming back to that the women in the bank guards are holding rolling pins. It's almost like they're getting revenge for being stiffed all these years. And it's like, you know what? Now that we're the police, we're just going to keep doing the same stupid jobs that you made us do all these years. We're going to keep, having the same stupid, hobbies and things like that. Or, we'll hold rolling pins because, heck, you don't expect us to be real police women anyway. So we'll just go back to being women. I mean, it's almost like, they're finally getting their revenge for having their roles limited for decades, centuries, what have you. And there's something hilarious about it once you look at it from that direction, that they're living up to stereotypes, and they're doing so very unselfconsciously. But the show itself does that so much. It has women falling back on very stereotypical female behaviors that are, have to do with frivolity and the home. It's so consistent that it, to me anyway, it suggests that, the men are kind of getting their just desserts for limiting women's roles so completely or so, drastically for so long.
Interesting.
So, I don't think the show has a feminist bone in its body intentionally, but I think it is at least, kind of accidentally satirizing the limitations placed on women's roles, when they're not police women or, bank guards, as Nora makes them in this episode.
On the board, in our thread about the script, they got into a discussion about types of women on Batman. Dell said, you basically had three types: arm candy Malls for the male villains, matronly characters like Aunt Harriet, Ma Parker, Black Widow, etc., and sexy female villains like Catwoman and Siren. Professional, capable women as important characters were very rare. We do see one early on with Zelda, but we have to go almost to the end of the series to see another one, and that is Nora Clavicle herself. I may have missed a few, but there just weren't many. Clavier Ankh suggested Betsy Boldface and Pinky Pinkston as career women. And
right.
Jim Aiken suggested Barbara Gordon. But Dell counters that the problem with that is that Barbara is only on the show because of Batgirl, who's there to look sexy in a tight costume.
That's another role, right? That's role number 4.
Yeah. But still, as a character, she doesn't quite fit the three categories because she doesn't throw herself at men. Like the sexy arm candy or villains like Catwoman, who kind of throws herself at Batman a little bit, or at least pretends to, while planning to kill him.
Right, and she does kind of fulfill the stereotype, too, of women who are career women not being attached because they don't have time. They're, kind of wedded to their jobs, which in Barbara's case is both librarian and superhero.
Now, the question that came to my mind was, which category would you put Marcia in? I think they're trying to sell her as sexy, but I think the result falls somewhere between sexy and matronly.
I agree. She's dressed quite frumpily, even, especially compared to her Morticia role on The Addams Family, the Carolyn Jones's other famous character from this period.
Yeah, so I checked. So she was 36 at the time. I mean, you can certainly still be sexy at 36, but...
Hell, she can still be sexy at 60 at 72. Look at Helen Mirren, folks. Come on.
I don't know. It just somehow, it feels like the portrayal of her in the script doesn't quite match the way Carolyn Jones is playing her.
Yeah, interesting.
The board also had some discussion of Barbara Rush with Theron of Andor, who lives in Australia, mentioning that Barbara Rush is great in wait for it, the Village People's Can't Stop the Music film, which
directed by Nancy Walker, by the way. Seriously, it was her first and last feature film, I think.
And for some reason, he says that that film was a hit in Sydney, but flopped pretty much everywhere else.
Wow.
And Ken Holzhauser remembers Barbara Rush mostly for Robin and the Seven Hoods, which is basically a Rat Pack movie.
Right, of course. And she was also on Peyton Place.
Mm-hmm.
She was part of the cast just a couple of years later. She's 96, by the way. She's still with us.
Get her on the show.
Absolutely. She has such an interesting voice, and I think she's very beautiful in this episode. That can't be hidden by her. I'm not sure if she's frumpy. She looks more like, as you mentioned, she looks more like she fits into the kind of businesswoman model. She's smartly
nonsense.
and professionally dressed, right? It's a shame. It's a shame that the character is so limited, but at least she's not one of the women carrying a rolling pin. That's a strike in her favor. Oh, here's another Batman Star Trek connection. She was married to Jeffrey Hunter from 1950 to 1955, and Jeffrey Hunter plays Captain Pike in the Menagerie / The Cage.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm looking at the Wikipedia page, and it's just filled with goodies.
Yeah, I think that came up on the board also, the Jeffrey Hunter connection.
Well, I don't know about you, Tim, but I have at least a little more, I guess, just kind of workmanship respect for this episode, knowing the limits that they had to work with and realizing that, yes, mistakes were made. And we've talked about those mistakes and, ways in which the script could have been fine-tuned further to, make it more season 1 and season 2 friendly in terms of how it represents the characters. But, clearly they were, under the gun in the in Dozier's production team at Greenway Productions was seriously just trying to crank these things out and make them the best they could under the circumstances.
Syndication.
Yeah, exactly. Just hold on, just 5 more episodes. Just hold on. So respect with a capital R. Even though I still find this episode a stinker in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm seeing the potential for what could have been with this episode. I mean, I'm still not sure what Stanford Sherman's point was. Yeah.
It seems as though if there was a point, it was primarily lost. It wasn't so much a point as it was a premise. What would happen if women took over the Gotham City Police Department? What kind of hijinks could ensue under those circumstances? Almost as if it wasn't, any kind of, anti-feminist diatribe. It was just like, here's something interesting that could happen, and we could use lots of pre-constituted stereotypes to write the script and, provide us with conflict and things like that.
Yeah, and what if the women were not trained to be police officers?
And just, the fact that they're fiddling with things that seem unimportant to the themes of the episode, like how we're going to get the three out of their, the three-way knot, the terrific trio, seems like, it suggests or implies at least a little bit, potentially to me, that they're really, kind of lost in the weeds for the writing and reformulating this episode, rather than ever thinking of it as a kind of overall plan. Like, what can I tell you? This is no Zodiac crimes.
I mean, in the first 2 seasons, there are death traps that aren't really related to the theme of the arc. But again, the problem is it's a one-parter, and they're still trying to shoehorn in a death trap. But the problem is when it's a one-parter, it takes up too much of the time that's supposed to be spent chasing the villain.
It's like, how about this for a death trap? Just have the wrestlers beat Batman to death. Yep. At least, that wouldn't have to be attached to any theme. It would just be like, oh, yeah, mortality.
Hello, I'm Ken Holzhauser, and if you're looking for something new in comic books, may I recommend my newest comic, The Quick and the Dad, a love letter to the DC, Marvel, Archie, and Harvey comics of my youth. This comic has everything. It has spaceships, dad jokes, alien invasions, time travel, supervillains, and so many bad puns. Hopefully you'll like it. It's the cutest comic you've never heard of, and it's available today in print and digital from indieplanet.com. That's The Quick and the Dad. Join that other dynamic duo, won't you?
Coming up, Lee Meriwether interviewed by Gene Boone in Austin, Texas before the premiere of the Batman movie on July 30th, 1966. And we read your mail in the Bat Inbox. This show is listener-supported through Patreon. Join us for $2 a month and get access to outtakes from every To the Bat Polls episode, trivia quiz videos on 20th century entertainment, and the right to vote on future Bat Polls topics. For a $4 monthly donation, you also get the right to have an ad for your own project on the show once a month, and hours of exclusive podcasts, including our monthly issue-by-issue walk through the early years of The Amazing Spider-Man. And we've now finished the Ditko years and reached the debut of John Romita Sr. So go to patreon.com/deconcomics and select the level of your monthly donation. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support.
And of course, she is here and can premiere, and she is one of the evil ones.
Oh,
and I want to, if we could, look how evil. Show the claws of the Catwoman. You were meowing a while ago. Do us some meows.
Oh, you want some meows?
Yeah.
Let's see. Do you want ecstasy meow?
All right.
You'll see that when I'm flying on a jet umbrella.
I see.
That's the jet umbrella ecstasy meow.
How did you learn all of those? I had assumed somebody else did them.
No. As a matter of fact, I had to even loop my own meows because of sound difficulties and everything. They didn't get them, and I came in for a whole day of looping just the meows. But I had we used to live in Phoenix, Arizona, and there were two cats that would continue every night on our back fence. And, the usual bit, they would every night until
So you learned.
After I was long gone asleep. But that's what I would go to sleep to. And I began imitating them, and so it became very easy for me to...
Surely. Did they know all of that when they chose you for the part?
No. As a matter of fact, they didn't even suggest in the script that she meows.
Yeah.
They had other ideas and all, and I said, "Gee, couldn't I just try a
May
meow
I
here,
please meow since
or
I know
purr
how?
here, or do this and that?"
Yeah.
And they were willing to go along with it,
That's
and
good.
it worked out fine.
Have you had fun?
Oh, yes, it was a marvelous experience.
How do you like living on the coast? You do live there now, don't you? Because
Yes.
I knew you were in New York when you were doing the Today Show.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I love it out there. It's I was born in Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're home
So I've returned home, really.
How strange.
And it's the weather is nice, and we have two daughters, and they're out in the sun all the time. and
Yeah,
it's,
that
it's
makes
much
it
better
great.
than in New York.
That's true. That's true. Do you miss the getting up for the Today Show?
Oh, well, it's not as bad in films as it was then. I used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
But now, what time do you have to get there, say, for all of the makeup?
For all the makeup, usually 6:30 in the morning.
You see, it's still
But
no
it's
bed of
still,
roses.
That's two and a half hours later.
Yeah,
Boy,
you're lucky
and
these
I hang
days.
on to that 2.5 hours.
Right. You've got another picture, I understand, that's ready for release.
It's called Namu the Killer Whale.
Good.
And that'll be out, it should be, I know in Los Angeles it's out next week.
Right.
So it should be out pretty soon. As a matter of fact, I'm going up for the premiere of that immediately following this. I have to arrive Sunday night in Los Angeles and leave Sunday night right away up to Seattle.
Yeah, and then there's another one coming up, something about tunnels?
Oh, that's the series.
That's television.
I'm on a series starting in September on Friday nights at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, but see, that's New York. It may not be here that time.
Right. Oh, I hope it will be. I don't know what, it may be 7 o'clock here.
Yeah.
I don't know how the time differential is.
Yeah.
But it's a marvelous science fiction
Well, that sounds
thriller,
fun.
and
Do you like all of this then?
Adventure. Oh, yes.
Good.
Yes.
Well, I know that I'd heard you studied under Lee Strasberg with your Miss America winnings, and couldn't have chosen a better man. So I hope you have a lot of luck. We'll look for you all the time.
Good.
Good.
Thank you.
Lee Meriwether, of course, here as Catwoman.
Bat Inbox, response to episode 197 about Adam and Frank's Shea Stadium show. This is going to be a two-parter. We'll cover some of it this time and the rest of it next time.
Let's see, how can we hook our cliffhanger to the theme of the episode? Well, I guess we won't worry about that. So first is from Ben Bentley. Hello, Ben. Ben writes, this was definitely an interesting topic for you guys to delve into. Thanks for spending some time with it. Beyond a handful of photos and the poster, of course, Shea Stadium doesn't really seem to loom all that large in the lore of the show for most fans. There's part of me that naively hopes that footage from this show may one day surface like it did for the recently released Marineland Carnival featuring the Munsters DVD. Hadn't heard about that. Following up on a few points from your discussion, Ben goes on to say, poster photo. The photo used for the poster for the Shea Stadium show is indeed a promotional portrait that was shot during season 1. Here's a frame from that same session, seconds before or after the shot used for the poster. And it's a nice color image of Adam in his costume in front of a red backdrop with the bat megaphone in hand. Next, Orange-Colored Sky, although Bert's 7-inch single of Orange-Colored Sky and Boy Wonder I Love You wasn't released until November 14th of 1966. The only two recording sessions, according to one of Zappa's biographers, took place on the 9th and 10th of June, 1966, a mere 2 weeks prior to Adam singing the song live at Shea Stadium. As a sidebar, these recording dates completely dispelled Bert's anecdotal account of the recording of his single, whereby he states that after the first day in the studio with Frank Zappa and Tom Wilson, who was also a producer for Bob Dylan, by the way, he claims that MGM forced him into 2 weeks of vocal lessons at a personal cost to Bert of $1,000 per week. Anywho, I won't derail my own post into further detours of debunking Bert's book. Otherwise, we'll all die of old age in the process.
Very good. Major task to debunk his book. So
Indeed.
This is a long message, so I'll pick up here. This is still bad. New Orleans / other tour dates? With the exception of the one New Orleans show poster that was auctioned a few years ago, the actual image used in the Medium article you referenced, there is very little evidence or reference anywhere else online to the show actually happening. I haven't had the time, but I would be intrigued as to what references there were to the gig in the local newspapers that week. There's a couple of things that I will throw into the mix to potentially provide some context. 26th of November 1966 was the Saturday of Thanksgiving week that year. That was the week that the company was finishing up shooting The Sandman Cometh / The Catwoman Goeth. Interestingly, neither Adam nor Bert were on the shooting schedule that day, and he includes a screenshot of the shooting schedule. You briefly touched on what I think is a very interesting and incredibly valid point. The fact that by the time of the Shea Stadium show in June 1966, Frank was no longer the Riddler. Frank's duties as the Riddler on screen had ended by the time the movie wrapped up shooting on the 31st of May 1966. Interestingly, as far as the timeline of events goes, the ill-fated discussions of higher salaries between Frank's representation and Dozier / Greenway actually came to a head while the movie was still in principal photography. The nail-in-the-coffin memo from Bill Dozier to Frank is dated May 9th, and he includes a screenshot of that.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand that an appearance like Shea Stadium, which was slated to happen within just a few weeks of all the back and forth about Frank's salary, was a contractual obligation and as such went ahead. But that being said, it is hard to imagine that the New Orleans show still went ahead with Frank in the live role, given that it was nearly a full 5 months later. But to be fair, and again for context, John Astin didn't begin to shoot his arc until the 3rd of January 1967. At that point, we hadn't seen the Riddler on screen since the movie, given that the only Riddler outing for the first half of the second season, A Penny for Your Riddles, They're Worth a Lot More, was reworked into The Puzzles Are Coming, The Duo is Slumming, which was filmed between October 20th and 27th of 66. I would certainly love to learn more about the New Orleans and or any other live performances that Adam and or Frank did in this fashion. So please, if anyone else does have insights, I know a lot of us here would be all bat ears.
Wow, chock full of info. That's really great context.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I'd ever seen the memo from Dozier with the final nail in the bat coffin, as Ben puts it.
I don't know that I had either. So then others on the board do some research. Paul, read the next one.
Okay, Mr. Glee did some research and comes up with this. This photo, which is here, is going to be on the Libsyn link, correct, Tim?
Yeah, I'll link to, this is all on the Bat message board. I'll link to it from there.
Okay. This photo ran in the December 17th of 66 edition of the Louisiana Weekly. No mention of Gorshin or City Park Stadium, though. And here there's a photo of Adam with several other people, including a policeman, and the caption says, "Batman dew dropping." After a performance in the city, Adam, quote, Batman and quote, West, visited the Dewdrop Lounge for the featured show. Quote unquote, Batman was the special guest of club owner Frank Pinea Center. Batman is at left wearing glasses. Also seen are fans and admirers and a special state police guard for the television star. Interesting.
So there's your proof that he did go to New Orleans, apparently without Frank.
Yes, and this looks like an interracial club, interestingly, for 66.
Yeah,
the owner is African American. The woman who Bruce, who Adams got his arm around and seems to have her arm around him as well, is African American. There's a man standing behind Adam with his hands on his shoulders who appears to be Caucasian. But at least two other people of the three in the photo appear to be African American. It's a little bit overexposed or underexposed, I guess. Photography was notoriously poor at picking up African American skin tone for decades and decades. They tended to light as well for white people without thinking very carefully about how to light the African Americans in the same shot, whether it was a film shot or a photographic shot. But anyway, really, really interesting.
And then Crispy Critter
included a clip from the Jefferson News of 10/20/66, and Jefferson, Louisiana. The Channel Chatter, the TV page by Joyce and Bob Wall. Here's what that says. Batman and Robin make news. Adam West is due in New Orleans for a personal appearance at City Park Stadium, November 26th. Tickets go on sale soon. Burt Ward, the junior partner, hospitalized last week for emergency treatment of severe face and arm burns. The accident occurred during filming of the Batman series.
So that must have been from the Preminger freeze, I think, when the cell that he's in, they put an explosive on it to open it, I think, and I think that resulted in him burning his arm, and you can see the bandage in another scene.
Right, of course.
Okay, so there are a couple more, but this has gone on long enough for this time. So we're right up to our 90-minute mark, so it's time to go.
We are the Boys of Chorus. We hope you like our show.
So we haven't decided if we're going to be able to do the next one 2 weeks from now, or it might be 3 or something. But our plan for episode 200 of To the Bat Polls is to discuss the novelization of Batman the movie, Batman and the Fearsome Foursome by Winston Lyon. I don't have my copy yet. Paul's going to send it to me. So it depends on that. But as soon as I can get the book and read it, then we will put out our next episode.
Yes, you're just going to have to wait on the slow boat to Japan, folks.
So, thanks for listening. See you again in 2 or 3 weeks at the same Bat RSS feed. You'll find links to the scripts and the theme version by Chad Vermillion in the show notes. Also, don't forget to check out the blog post on Batman Star Trek casting crossovers and let me know if I've left anyone off the list. If you have any interesting Bat audio to pass on, and I'm really running short, or you'd like to make a donation to the show through PayPal, or you just want to drop us a line, the address is batpoles@deconstructingcomics.com. You can also comment on the thread for each episode and each script at 66batman.com/forums or on our blog at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. We're on Twitter at Decon Comics and on the Deconstructing Comics channel on YouTube. You can hear outtakes from this and every episode of To the Batpoles and vote for topics for future episodes by supporting us at patreon.com/deconcomics. You can also help us out by shopping via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon, by sharing our episodes on your social media, and by subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And spread the word. Let all your friends who are Batman 66 fans know about the show. Next time, our 200th episode, we discuss Winston Lyon's novelization of Batman the Movie, entitled Batman vs. the Fearsome Foursome. See you then. To the Batpoles is a production of DeconstructingComics.com.